Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rotoballer Radio Waiver Wire Series. I'm your host, Anthony Aniano, coming at you with an early look at the waiver wire for Week 15, the first week of the fantasy playoffs. Guys, don't forget, head over to rotoballer.com. Check out everything there. The main page, the premium package, the expert chats, you name it, rotoballer.com has it for you. Whether it's DFS all season long, baseball, football, basketball, MMA, esports, NASCAR, PGA, sports betting, rotoballer.com, the place to be. Sign up for any premium pass. Use the promotional code ACES, letting them know Anthony Aniano sent you. All right, guys. As you know, we get at the waiver wire real early here at rotoballer.com, so time to take a look at Week 15. Hopefully, you're watching. You're watching for one of two reasons. Either A, you've made your fantasy playoffs, or for some reason, you just enjoy the sound of my voice. Hopefully, it's choice A, and you're active still in your fantasy football league. No bye weeks next week. We're done with them. So really now for the playoffs, if you've been streaming positions or still dealing with injuries, maybe some of these players will help you. But we'll start at the quarterback position, where really, in most cases, you'll be able to go with the quarterback who got you to the playoffs, except for a few circumstances. We saw Lamar Jackson leave Week 14 with an ankle injury. Tyler Heineke left with a knee situation. Both those players out. So really, if Lamar Jackson's been your guy or you're in a 2QB league, there are a few players who could potentially help. Number one is it's time maybe to pay a little bit of attention to Ben Roethlisberger. Only 22% rostered on Yahoo.com. Thursday night against Minnesota in that comeback, that frantic comeback in the fourth quarter against the Vikings. He ended up throwing for 308 yards and 3 touchdowns, 30.8 fantasy points. He's got 23 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, and he has 9 touchdown passes over his last 4. So he's finding Claypool, he's finding Deontay Johnson. Freiermuth has become a weapon as well. Okay, Pittsburgh is still trying to stay playoff relevant. They face Tennessee Week 15. Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers is up second here, 30% rostered. Overtime game, the game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Finishes that off with the touchdown pass to Brandon Ayuk. He finishes 296 and 2 touchdowns, 24 fantasy points for Jimmy Garoppolo. And great matchup against the Atlanta Falcons for the 49ers quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo in Week 14. So Jimmy Garoppolo's available. And finally, number 3, again, based on matchup, coming off the bye, is Tua Tagovailoa against the New York Jets. We're going to keep picking on the Jets. It works. It worked with Taysom Hill. Okay, finishing off your day with that 44-yard run at the end of the game. Well, Tua's not playing with a bad finger. Tua is healthy. The running back situation could be a bit of a mess in Miami with Gaskin and Ahmed banged up, dealing with COVID and whatnot, but his wide receivers are healthy. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki at tight end. Tua, 31% rostered. 4 of his last 7 games, he's thrown for 21 or more fantasy points, and he's got a great matchup, a matchup we continue to pick on against the New York Jets defense. So, if for some of you are scrambling to make up for Lamar Jackson, you're in a 2QB league looking for a streamer option, Big Ben retirement tour potentially has looked good of late. Tua's got a great matchup, as does Jimmy Garoppolo against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, at the running back position, this is the be-all and end-all. This is whatever fab you have left, this is where you are going all in. It is all in. Push the chips to the center of the table on Rashad Penny of the Seattle Seahawks. He is by far and away the number 1 waiver wire ad of the week and the one who can actually have a major impact through the fantasy playoffs. 18% rostered, goes 16 for 137 and 2 touchdowns, catches a pass as well, 26.8 fantasy points. Alex Collins was next on the team with 7 carries. Adrian Peterson, a non-factor. DJ Dallas, a non-factor. Tough matchup for Seattle against the Rams on the road next week. But nonetheless, Rashad Penny, if you could find a running back at less than 20% rostered who's going for $137 and 2 touchdowns at this point in the year, you use whatever fab you have left on him. Especially considering we had a couple of injuries in the Sunday games. Okay, Austin Eckler left with an ankle. Kareem Hunt left with an ankle. Again, back up your players. If you have Nick Chubb, you have Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson is available on the waiver wire. We've seen him have success in the past. If Austin Eckler is your running back, be mindful of Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly, the two young running backs for the Chargers. The problem is, both of those running backs, if Eckler were to miss some time, I would expect a timeshare situation between Jackson and Kelly. Okay, both of them less than 5% rostered on Yahoo. Jackson went 9 for 35 after Eckler went out. Josh Kelly went 10 for 33. But again, it was a mismatch as well against a Giant team that looks like it had just given up. And I'm saying that as a Giant fan. Neither one of them got in the end zone. They both play Kansas City, obviously. The Chargers play Kansas City next week. So again, back up your Eckler. The problem's going to be, who's it going to be if Eckler were to miss some time? So a couple of other running backs to be mindful of. Corey Clement of the Dallas Cowboys. 1% rostered. Tony Pollard was out. They did not make Zeke Elliott the 25 carry guy. Right now, his knee just can't handle that. Corey Clement splits carries with Zeke Elliott. Elliott goes for 12. Clement goes 13 for 44. Now, part of that was that game got, the lead got big for Dallas. Washington made it interesting at the end. But Corey Clement goes 13 for 44, catches a ball for 2 yards. Only 5.6 fantasy points. Maybe in the desperation of desperates, Corey Clement is in the lineup. But the reality is, if you have Zeke Elliott and you're in the playoffs, and if you have Tony Pollard and he's going to potentially miss more time, although early indications are he may be active next week, nonetheless, watch that situation. Corey Clement did split carries with Zeke Elliott, and it's a smash situation for the Dallas offense against that New York Giants defense. Royce Freeman of the Houston Texans was involved. David Johnson out with COVID. Rex Burkhead, which is less than inspiring. Royce Freeman, just be mindful of him in a PPR format, did have 8 targets, 6 receptions, 51 yards. And if David Johnson remains out, Royce Freeman has a great matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars next week. He's a 0% roster. He's a freebie. And finally, Craig Reynolds of the Detroit Lions goes 11 carries for 83 yards, catches 2 passes for 16 yards. Tough matchup against Arizona next week. But if Swift remains out, who knows what happens with Jamal Williams and COVID-19. It looks like Craig Reynolds is next up in the Detroit backfield. Again, none of these running backs are very inspiring. I am openly admitting that. A lot of them are desperation plays, except for Rashad Penny. That's why we're pushing all our fab into the center of the table and getting Rashad Penny, who's at 18% rostered, onto our teams. At the wide receiver position, I've mentioned KJ Osborne before. If Adam Thielen continues to miss time with the ankle, Osborne has been fantastic. 32 fantasy points and 16 targets in his last 2 games. He had 3 receptions for 83 yards on Thursday night on 9 targets, including a touchdown. Goes on the road against the Bears in Week 15. Robbie Anderson of the Carolina Panthers now has 22 targets in his last 3 games, just over 7 targets per game, including 12 targets, Week 14, and a touchdown, although a tough matchup for that Carolina offense and the uncertainty at quarterback between Cam Newton and P.J. Walker. Robbie Anderson on the road against Buffalo. Rashad Bateman. I just dropped Rashad Bateman after a Week 13 goose egg he gave me. He comes in, especially after Lamar Jackson goes out. Rashad Bateman goes 7 for 103, 17.3 fantasy points against Green Bay. Donovan Peoples-Jones of the Cleveland Browns. He's one of my favorite wide receiver ads. He's probably number 2 after KJ Osborne. Donovan Peoples-Jones, 5 receptions on 7 targets, 90 yards. Great matchup for the Cleveland offense against that Vegas defense that could not stop Kansas City at all in Week 14. Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, 12 more targets on Sunday. That gives him 12 targets in 2 straight games. He goes 8 for 73, a 15.3 fantasy point game. Amon-Ra St. Brown has become Jared Goff's go-to guy. Okay, he's got 18 receptions and 24 targets over his last 2 games. And finally, the Chargers duo of Jalen Guyton and Josh Palmer. Again, Chargers offense has too many weapons. It's a luxury for Justin Herbert, but it's a nightmare for fantasy players. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen may be back. If Keenan Allen is back, Guyton and Palmer lose a ton of volume. Again, it was a smash situation against the Giants defense. They're available. My advice, if you don't have a lot of fab left, I look elsewhere because once Allen returns, Guyton and Palmer slide back on the depth chart. So when I look at the wide receiver position, KJ Osborne sits at number 1. Donovan Peoples-Jones is at number 2. Amon-Ra St. Brown sits at number 3. You have Bateman, Anderson, and the Chargers duo if you're desperate then for wide receivers. And finally, and keep in mind, Terry McLaurin did leave his game this week with a concussion. And finally, at the tight end position, a couple of names to mention. Austin Hooper, 41% rostered. 2 of his last 3 games, he has 7 targets, including Week 14 where he went 5 for 30 and a touchdown. Again, great matchup for Cleveland in Week 15 against the Vegas Raiders. Gerald Everett of the Seattle Seahawks gets in the end zone. 2 targets, 2 receptions, 15 yards. He's 31% rostered. 17 targets in his last 3 games. Week 13 was a nightmare. 3 turnovers. He was productive in Week 12, productive in Week 14. Okay, Seattle at the Rams. And then finally, Nick Vannett of the New Orleans Saints. Taysom Hill went to him often. 6 targets, 3 receptions for 44 yards. He's got 10 targets in his last 2 games. 7.4 fantasy points as the Saints are on the road against the Tampa Bay Bucks. All right, everybody. So to review, quarterbacks, Roethlisberger, Tua, and Jimmy G. At the running back position, it is the most important ad of the playoffs, and that's Rashad Penny. And then we have a lot of depth. Corey Clement, Jackson and Kelly from the Chargers, Freeman from Houston, Reynolds from Detroit, all contingent on what happens with the players ahead of them, but nonetheless give you roster depth. Wide receiver position, there are players who can make an impact. Osborne, Peoples-Jones, Amon-Ra St. Brown, with Robbie Anderson, Bateman, and the Chargers duo of Palmer and Guyton behind them. And finally, at the tight end position, Hooper, Everett, and Vannett of the New Orleans Saints. All right, folks, give me a follow on Twitter at Aniano Fantasy. Make sure you like and subscribe right here to the Rotoballer YouTube channel. Check out all the great content from Waiver Wire on Tuesday to the King and Pocket Aces on Saturday with all the start sit in between. Make sure you check all of that out as well. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time. Stay smart, stay safe. Good luck in those playoffs. Have a good one, folks.